Very much. I'd like to call the meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order this morning. This morning we have guests with us from the Department of Environment and from the Department of Energy. And I would like to begin the meeting with an introduction of our committee members, if we could, beginning with Mr. Epstein.
Morning, Howard Epstein, MLA Halifax Shabukto, substituting today for Mo Smith, MLA for Antigonish.
Matt Wynot, MLA Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville.
Gary Ramey, MLA Lunenburg West, sitting in for Becky Kent.
Clary McKinnon, MLA Pictou East.
Leonard Pereira, MLA Halifax Citadel, Sable Island.
Keith Caldwell, MLA Preston.
Cecil Clark, MLA for Cape Breton North.
Thank you. Diana Whalen, MLA for Halifax Clayton Park and Chair of the Public Accounts Committee.
Alan Horgan, Deputy Auditor General.
Darlene Henry, Committee Clerk.
Jason Hall, Department of Environment.
Nancy Vanstone, Nova Scotia Environment.
Andrew Murphy, Nova Scotia Environment.
Murray Coolican, Department of Energy.
And Scott McCombs, Department of Energy.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And just two things. Today on our timing, we have quite a bit of committee business at the end of the meeting. So I wanted to time it to about 11:15 to finish the presentation. So we allow 15 minutes for our committee business. And I would like to begin by asking for an opening statement. If you have, I think we have two presentations perhaps before us. So who would like to begin? Will it be Ms. Vanstone? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And no presentation from me, just okay. a few opening remarks. We've already introduced ourselves. I just wanted to indicate about my colleagues who are with me here today and what their role is with respect to the area that you're interested in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Jason Hall is our acting Executive Director of the Climate Change Directorate, and that's a group within the Department of Environment that works with our department and with other departments, with municipalities, federal government, involved in our representations at international committees on climate change. And Andrew Murphy is our manager in the air quality branch in our department. And in all of the work we do on greenhouse gas emissions, we work very hard to make sure that's integrated with other air emissions. And so that's why both of these gentlemen are here with me today. So we're here to update you on our progress on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. We've taken several steps to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so we're very pleased to be able to talk to you about that today. We have put in legislation a commitment to reduce Nova Scotia's greenhouse gas emissions by at least 10% below 1990 levels by the year 2020. That's about an 18% reduction from where we are today. We have developed a climate change action plan which sets us on a path to achieve the commitment. It outlines 68 specific actions which cut across many government departments, and I'm happy to say that we've started or completed well over 90% of those actions. To fulfill the first action item in that climate change plan, we have put hard caps on greenhouse gas emissions from power generation facilities. That takes effect this year, and this is a very important step for Nova Scotia because it directly targets the largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions in Nova Scotia, representing about 50% of our emissions. We have developed greenhouse gas regulations which allow the electricity sector the flexibility to meet the caps with the lowest cost option so that they can ensure reliability of supply and minimize impacts to ratepayers. As the cost of fossil fuels continue to rise, this transition to cleaner sources of energy is expected to result in stable and lower costs for Nova Scotia than if we were to continue on our high dependence on fossil fuels. I'm proud to say that Nova Scotia is the only jurisdiction in Canada to place hard caps on greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector. We are also one of the few provinces to have put our aggressive greenhouse gas emissions reduction target into legislation. Achieving these targets is certainly a challenge for a province that gets over 85% of its electricity from coal and other fossil fuels. But we believe we can meet that challenge. And we believe that because of the careful analysis we've done and our consultations with many stakeholders. When we put the regulations into effect to cap greenhouse gas emissions, we also updated our air quality regulations to include reduced caps on sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions. Reducing the caps reduces air pollutants, and that helps smog and reduce the effects of acid rain. We believe that these strict caps on greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutants will ensure more investment in energy efficiency and cleaner sources of energy. We also believe that the caps will help Nova Scotia become a cleaner and greener place for families in every region of the province. To drive the transformation to a lower carbon economy, we are investing up to $42.5 million in Eco Nova Scotia projects, which will reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our province by more than 200,000 tonnes and air pollutant emissions by approximately 950 tonnes. These will be annual reductions achievable by 2020. We are also working across government to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation and to reduce our own government carbon footprint. And we're working with municipalities on their reductions. We are transforming to deal with the challenges of climate change and to put ourselves on the path to be one of the cleanest and greenest places in the world by 2020. We are making substantive progress on our actions in the climate change plan, and we're well on the way to achieving those goals. Our climate change initiatives have given us a leadership profile, and we won awards for Nova Scotia at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Copenhagen last December. We were recognized for placing our hard caps on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions and received a second award for our commitment to green energy alternatives. Meeting our targets and commitments will require significant investment in energy efficiency and in renewable energy. These will generate economic opportunity for us as well. Energy efficiency is a critical component, and Conserve Nova Scotia and looking forward with Efficiency Nova Scotia, we will be using less energy in the future. This represents a tremendous opportunity in terms of new investment in Nova Scotia and also significant cost avoidance for people and businesses in Nova Scotia. As I mentioned, another important element of the approach is renewable energy. With a new target requiring 25% of our electricity to come from renewable sources by 2015, and a goal to increase that percentage to 40% by 2020. So for more on our renewable energy strategy and how it will help us achieve greenhouse gas emission reductions, I'd like to turn the podium over to my colleague, the Deputy Minister of Energy.
All right, thank you. Mr. Coolican.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nancy, and good morning, everyone. I'm joined this morning by Scott McCombs, who's the Director of Energy Markets, who will help me to answer any technical questions. And on some of the broader questions, I may get a kick under the table from time to time as well. It's an honor for me to make my first appearance before this committee, and it's an honor for me to do so with Nancy Vanstone, who hopes she's making her last appearance before this committee. So I'll be brief. Nancy spoke about our GHG goals, and I'd like to offer a summary of the work the Department of Energy is doing around renewable electricity. And clearly this work fits together. Our electricity sector, as Nancy mentioned, is Nova Scotia's #1 source of greenhouse gases because it's so highly dependent on imported coal. And I've circulated some slides that also has some of this information, and it clearly shows that our motivation to transition to renewable has many motivations, both environmental and economic. Our reliance on imported coal leaves us vulnerable to the volatility of world market prices and exposes us to the costs of carbon policies, both nationally and internationally. This transition to renewable is not simply about running away from carbon, it's also about creating opportunities. Opportunities for jobs, investment, and long-term energy security, and long-term price stability. Our renewable electricity plan and the legislation recently passed to support it makes our target of 25% renewable electricity law. That's equal to about 300,000 homes running on green power. We also set a new goal of 40% renewable electricity by 2020, and that's enough power for about 500,000 homes, more than all the homes in Nova Scotia. These are very aggressive standards, but the plan outlines a suite of tools that I think will get us there. One of the foundations of the plan is providing opportunities for everyone to participate, from the power utility and independent businesses to communities and individuals. The most economical way to produce renewable energy is through large and medium-sized projects that can take advantage of economies of scale. And since keeping prices as low as possible for consumers is the #1 objective, this plan calls for the bulk of renewable energy to come in equal parts from Nova Scotia Power and independent power producers. The UARB will enforce regulations that ensure consumers' best interests are being met, and a renewable electricity administrator will oversee competition amongst independents to ensure fairness and best value for ratepayers. The Mi'kmaq, municipalities, not-for-profits, and community-based cooperatives interested in running their own renewable energy projects will be able to operate with the certainty of a fixed price or feed-in tariff for their energy. And all Nova Scotians, individuals and businesses, will be able to participate through an enhanced net metering program that will pay consumers for any excess energy they produce over a year. Recognizing the unique opportunity of the highest tides in the world, we will also establish feed-in tariffs for tidal projects connected at both the distribution and transmission levels of the grid. Biomass already plays a significant role in providing energy for the province. That role will expand within cautious limits to ensure sustainability. Over time, government anticipates a larger role for natural gas to balance the intermittent nature of renewable electricity sources such as tidal and wind. This plan is expected to support up to $1.5 billion of investment in the province. That investment will create jobs in construction, supply, manufacturing, and maintenance, generating an estimated 5,000 to 7,500 person-years of employment inside the province, with opportunities in both urban and rural areas. There are costs associated with moving in this direction, especially up front. We expect an increase of 1% to 2% per year on electricity bills in the short term. But in the long run, Nova Scotia will be better off. We will have a far more diverse and secure energy supply, and we will have more fuel sources that are on long 15, 20, 25-year fixed price contracts that will help stabilize electricity rates and in the long run be less expensive. I can't predict when that break-even point will be because I don't have a crystal ball to predict the future costs of energy. But we are convinced that if we are going to meet the targets that Nancy talked about, targets that had all party support in 2007, renewable electricity must play a central role. The draft regulations to support this plan are now public, and we'll have a public meeting scheduled out shortly. Thank you for your interest in what we're doing, and now together with Scott, Jason, Andrew, and Nancy, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooligan. And we will begin the first 20 minutes of questioning with Mr. Caldwell for the Liberal Caucus.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank everybody for coming this morning. It's a very important topic for all Nova Scotians, and I realize that you're working very, very hard on this. And it is a daunting task, to say the least. Just a couple of things. The one thing in my area, I'm going to start with sort of some observations and get some comments back. In my area, the Atlantic Superstore installed a wind turbine back of their store, which I think was a great thing, and the community thinks it's a great thing, and indeed it will help offset some of their direct costs for energy, which is always very positive. But then I understand that the Halifax Regional Municipality outlawed windmills at the rest of the superstores in HRM. Is that correct?
Would that be Ms. Vanstone or Mr. Cooligan? Who would like to take the question? Okay, Ms. Vanstone, we'll start there. Thank you.
Start and then pass it over to energy, because just to talk about, I can't speak about HRM's process, so maybe energy can take that part of the question. But in terms of what Nova Scotia Environment's role is with the approval of wind energy, we do require all wind energy projects that are over 2 megawatts to go through an environmental assessment, and we give them approval through the Department of Environment. That would be the provincial regulation on this. I'm not sure if my colleagues at Energy know about the HRM approvals or not.
Mr. Cooligan.
I can make a few comments, but I have to take it as notice. Obviously, the municipalities do have the authority to regulate within their jurisdictions. I'm not aware of the specific HRM bylaw in question, and I'll get more information on that for you. I am a bit surprised because I did meet with the company that installed that wind turbine for Atlantic Superstores, and that was not an issue that he raised with me. There are a number of issues that our department has with HRM that we'd like to create an ongoing dialogue with HRM, and I recently wrote to Mayor Kelly to suggest an ongoing discussion on a regular basis so that we could resolve issues such as the one you've raised.
The reason I ask this, and I just want to confirm it, because I think that we've seen in the past municipalities basically, and I'm going to just talk about wind turbines, and I'm sure it applies to a lot of other things as well, so I'm just using that as an example, basically taxed some of the producers of and companies that had wind turbines to death, to the point that it was not profitable anymore. If this is true with HRM, indeed they're setting up an initiative here. They're going to stop these facilities being generated. I think it's about time that the province stepped in and said, you know, if we're going to move towards renewable energy and get these kind of results that you're talking about here, which I fully support, and I believe Nova Scotians support fully, but we run into all this time, well, I don't want to see a turbine, but where do people think the energy comes from? And I think it's time that the province stood up and took some responsibility for this, and ultimately the province can tell the municipality you know, what the rules are. And is there any move towards that? Is there any consideration of doing that, or is the province even interested in doing that?
Mr. Cooligan.
Thank you. The issue of community acceptability for renewable energy is an important one. I think you'll note from the renewable electricity plan that the approach we're taking at this stage is a cooperative approach. We are encouraging through the community feed-in tariff an opportunity for communities to become engaged in a positive way in the development of renewable, and we hope that will encourage municipalities to participate with us in achieving these goals. I should also add that the government has done a fair amount of work with the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities and are funding some of the municipalities to do some work on planning for renewable energy in a desire to bring them on board cooperatively. That would be the initial our initial approach to this issue. I might also add that I've seen a video recently on the wind farm in Pubnico, which showed residents and local municipal officials in the area talking quite positively, not all 100% of them, but the majority of them talking positively about the wind farm in their neighborhood, including one gentleman who actually sold a house further away from the wind farm and moved to one closer to the wind farm. So there are signs that there is an acceptance of renewable energy in the province, and we'd like to encourage it at this point on a cooperative basis.
I'm pleased to hear that. I'm not for just going in and putting windmills wherever you want them and doing all. I'm not for that at all. That's not what I'm saying. But it seems to me there seems to be a reluctance on some of the municipalities to realize how important this is, and just how they should probably help educate the people in their communities a little bit better to understand what these are. I mean, this one they put up in Porter's Lake, there was no issue. There is no issue, and people think it's a great idea, and but all of a sudden someone complains about it someplace, and bang, there's a bylaw. I believe that's the case. A bylaw that you can't put any more of them up. And I would like to get that information to confirm that for sure. Hopefully it's not accurate information, I hope, but I imagine it is, based on what happens all the time. So I appreciate your work in that area, and I know it's very difficult. The other thing is, are you going to really get to the 2015 goals and the 2020 goals? You've readjusted them already, just up the numbers, percentages a little bit higher, but move the years out. And when you bring the percentage up, you still got to achieve a tremendous amount. Is that real? Do you really think you can make that?
Yes.
I like that answer. That's good. I'll believe when I see it, and I hope that you exceed it, quite frankly. So there's also, there was fines. Fines were installed on renewable energy producers. Shearwind Inc., who had forfeited $500,000, and Security Deposits Nova Scotia Power for missing a November 30, 2009 deadline, providing the utility with green energy. And also Renewable Energy Services of Lower Sackville missed their deadline and paid $550 million. But Nova Scotia Power was given an extension by the province. And indeed, the money that those two, the over $1 million that were received, was received by Nova Scotia Power. And at the same time, Nova Scotia Power didn't have to pay the province anything, and was just walked away with another $1 million in their pocket. And for whatever reason, the province didn't charge Nova Scotia Power. When that deal was negotiated, if an extension was necessary, sometimes that's necessary, but it shouldn't have been. It should have been negotiated, I would think, a little bit better, so these small companies don't get help support to pay for Nova Scotia Power. What happened in that case?
I'm not familiar with the details of that case, as I wasn't here at the time. I think you raised an important question, and that is the question of responsibility for achieving the targets that we'd all like to achieve. Your earlier question is related to that. We like to view this as a target that the whole province of Nova Scotia has to achieve, that the government has to be involved in supporting. As you mentioned earlier, municipal governments need to be on side with this. Obviously, Nova Scotia Power has a role to play, as do the independent power producers. I think individuals, when we look at issues of energy efficiency and demand-side management, part of meeting the target is keeping our demand relatively low, because if demand goes up considerably, the target goes up at the same time. So demand side management and energy efficiency are important elements of this. So these targets are something that we all have to take some responsibility for. In doing that, the province has indicated some issues where it will hold Nova Scotia Power accountable. And in all of these issues, one has to make a judgment of what is the best way to achieve the target and the goal. And that's the basis on which the government is making its decisions about the performance of Nova Scotia Power in this process. The issue of Nova Scotia Power and the contracts that they have with their suppliers is an issue between Nova Scotia Power and the suppliers.
I would have thought the province might have negotiated better, and indeed, if they let Nova Scotia Power off the hook, they should have enforced Nova Scotia Power to let their suppliers off the hook at the same time. So it's probably a negotiation that should have been done a little bit, whoever did that, a little bit better. A question I'll ask then is, if Nova Scotia Power doesn't meet their new extended deadline, December 31st, 2011, they're going to be penalized for it, or they'll be let off the hook again?
Well, I may be new to government, but one of the things I learned a long time ago is not to answer hypothetical questions. So I'm pretty confident that they'll meet their goals, and that I won't be in a position of advising the minister or the government on making that decision. Again, I think it's better for all of us to consider these goals as goals that belong to all of us, and it's important that we all take steps to help to meet those goals in a cooperative manner.
I don't think the small companies that had to pay the $1 million Nova Scotia Power would agree with your statement, but anyway. To your knowledge, did the minister meet with the CEO of Nova Scotia Power? He indicated that he was going to do that regarding this issue.
Yeah, I don't have knowledge of that. I know that the minister and I meet regularly with officials from Nova Scotia Power, but I'm not aware of the circumstances around that discussion.
Okay. On several occasions, our caucus has introduced legislation to allow independent renewable energy producers to sell directly to customers in Nova Scotia. What's your opinion on this legislation? Would that work?
I haven't reviewed the legislation itself, so I'd be reluctant to express an opinion on the legislation. But I think the province as a whole has looked at how the electricity system in the province is organized, and has looked at examples in other jurisdictions where they have taken a different approach and opened up their systems to more competition. And our assessment at this time is that those examples have led to higher prices than jurisdictions that have kept the kind of system that we have, where the major supplier is the regulated utility.
What's the Department of Environment's role in the process of approving biomass projects in Nova Scotia? What's the process you have to go through for that?
Ms. Vanstone.
Okay. We would need to look at biomass as an input into the approvals for plants that are currently maybe burning other fuels, or there are some facilities that do burn biomass products now, so it will be part of their industrial approval and the requirements that they need to meet there in terms of particularly our concern to be around air emissions and particularly particulate emissions. Andrew, maybe I'll ask Mr. Murphy to just speak in a little more detail about where that might get reflected in terms of our approvals.
Mr. Murphy.
Sure, thank you. So plants above a certain size, they would be considered an electrical generating facility. And we have a set of regulations called the approval designation regulations, designated activities regulations, I'm sorry. And facilities above a certain size would require an operating approval from this department. in securing that operating approval, we would be looking at things like air emissions and what kind of air emissions need to be managed, and what kind of technologies might be put in place to manage those emissions.
Likewise, the Department of Energy, what's your role in this, approving this process?
Mr. Coolican?
Yeah, I think our role in this has been outlined pretty much in the renewable electricity plan, where we've set out the role that we see biomass playing in meeting those targets, and we've set some limits based on discussions with the Department of Natural Resources about the biomass resource, and we've taken a rather conservative view of that. And as we go further along, we will continue to consult with the Department of Natural Resources with respect to the kinds of guidelines that they think should be put in place for the sustainability of the forest. There is a significant process that goes on at the Utilities and Review Board, and that process is underway now, and the Department of Energy plays a role in that, but that's the major regulatory process from an energy and electricity point of view, handled by the UARB.
Yeah, thank you for that information, but Nova Scotia's 2020 target for greenhouse gas emissions would cut the province's annual greenhouse gas production by at least 5 megatons, roughly equivalent to taking 1 million cars off the highway. What are you doing to educate the public on this? And it really goes back to the things that was talking about wind turbines going up. What are you doing to educate the public? I think that's probably maybe where we have to go, but again, that's not for me to say.
Well, that's a great question. First of all, one of the things that we tried to do was to undertake a broad stakeholder consultative process in preparing the renewable electricity plan, which Dr. Wheeler led, and which I had the benefit of being a participant in, and saw Nova Scotians from across the province involved in that process so that they could be better educated about it, that they could feel a sense of participation in what we were doing. We also went to some lengths, as has been noted in the media, to ensure that the plan itself was well written and accessible to the public, and to ensure that there was a good deal of publicity when the announcement of the new policy was made. We are now in the process of consultation on the regulations, which again I hope will help to engage Nova Scotians in what is happening. We've also been doing some work, as I mentioned, with the municipalities, helping to educate people at the UNSM and individual municipalities, helping to educate them about the processes, and also helping to encourage them to get involved. We've been doing some work in cooperation with the Department of Education to educate, I believe it's grade 8 or grade 9 students about renewable energy and the impacts it will have on the province. Often, in my experience, it's the kids coming home talking to the parents, which is one of the more effective ways of educating people. I certainly learned a lot from my kids, not always in a positive way, but it was helpful. I think also the structure of the community feed-in tariff, which we hope will engage communities to learn more about renewable energy and their role in the process. The work of Conserve Nova Scotia is continuing until Efficiency Nova Scotia comes on board, and part of their work has been to educate Nova Scotians about the importance of reducing their energy use and using it more efficiently to achieve their goals and lifestyle in a way that helps us to achieve our targets for renewable electricity.
Do you have, in addition to that, do you have anything planned just for the general public that typically won't go to meetings, and because those are the people that really push us as elected representative, and it'd be the same thing for councillors.
Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your time has elapsed.
Thank
so
you.
we'll save that for the second round if we could, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Clark for the Conservative Caucus.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and good morning to everyone and to our colleagues. And I want to wish our NDP colleagues a happy anniversary today. And indeed, we're one more year, one more day to truly getting back to balance, Madam Chair. However, I want to welcome our guests, and what's that?
You're lighting a candle for us.
Yeah, well, yes, I would have brought a candle for my cupcake for you there, but however, I digress. But Madam Chair, I just wanted to start off, and I just want to clarify, this is the document that the Premier, I think, released from the mountaintop.
Yes.
So if I can ask our colleagues, if the Premier went up on the mount to pronounce this document, when he came down, did he have any tablets with dollar figures inscribed in them?
And who would you like that question to go to, Mr.
Just
Cooligan?
general. Well, where are the numbers?
Mr. Cooligan.
Let me answer that question. First of all, the Premier's choice of venue is actually one of the first independent power producers in the province to successfully develop a wind farm which is producing renewable electricity that's being used in the grid. And I'm sure the honourable member would want to, along with us, celebrate his accomplishments and our approach to trying to draw attention to his success as an example of what others in the province can do. It happens that the best wind is on the mountain, and so that's why the wind farm was located there. And if you want to celebrate the success of that project and go to the wind farm, you have to go to the mountain. I think in terms of the costs of this plan, I think we've been relatively transparent. As you would know, the forecasting energy costs is not a simple matter, and it's not possible to be completely accurate. But we have in the document and in my opening statement talked about what we think the annual additional costs of this program will be. On the other side of the equation, it's not really possible to know what costs we'll be avoiding by taking this approach. So we tend to talk about price stability as being one of the benefits, but it would be hard for me to predict with any accuracy that as to when we can tell you that it would have been our approach is less expensive than the other approach. Although I might add that through the IRP process, a lot of the best minds in the province on these issues were brought together, and it was felt at that time that the kind of approach that we've embarked on is better for the province long-term in terms of costs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I guess for starters, a picture of the mountaintop would have sufficed, but the Premier went up on the mountain and made a pronouncement, obviously did not come down with his tablets and budgets and numbers and a thought-out process and or targets that are associated by year or by sector or activity around the province. And, you know, and spent, I think, well in excess of $40,000 in the process during a deficit spending year when every dollar needed could have helped a community co-op to utilize energy efficiency and conserve, could have helped people. So there is some, and it's not for the deputy, of course. This is a statement I'm making about the direction of the government and not about he or his colleagues, but the choices around this, and I guess what I'm going at, is it's very difficult for Nova Scotians to comprehend what the impact of this plan is going to be if they can't even buy, are there specific targeted regions around the province? that have already been pre-identified, what scale of development can occur in those regions, what is going to be the feed-in tariff opportunity for small scale versus other commercial, and a large scale feed-in tariff that would be competitive with the utility. Where are we going to be with the prospects? Does this envision tapping into any of the lower Churchill, or is this in terms of if we have a subsea cable that brings green energy here, does that mean we just tap into that and try to use that as some credits in terms of consumption? Are they anticipated? Are we going to be recognizing any power brought in from other renewable sources elsewhere that, again, the government could be looking to try and say we've met our targets because we've accessed these other forms of renewables to displace our current reliability on fossil fuels? So is somewhere, someplace, if you're making targets and making a commitment of 40% to 2020, there must be some projected numbers and expenses to that, because, and where I'm going is, and I'll ask that question, but it really relates to the ratepayers of Nova Scotians and how it's going to impact them both short and long term.
Mr. Cooligan.
Yeah, I mentioned crystal ball, and unfortunately we don't have a crystal ball that would answer a lot of those questions. But let me deal with a number of issues that you've raised. First of all, the feed-in tariff. We took a view that in the interests of costs, that it would be better for the ratepayers if the majority of the renewable energy came from projects developed by Nova Scotia Power, who will be regulated by the UARB in terms of their costs, or from independent power producers who will be regulated through an independent administrator who will run competitions between the different proposals. And we thought that that was a better approach than setting a feed-in tariff for all the renewable energy that we were looking for. That's an approach that's been taken in other jurisdictions, and we were concerned about the prices set for some of those feed-in tariffs and what that would mean to Nova Scotia ratepayers. We did take an approach for a community feed-in tariff because, as I mentioned earlier, we thought it was important to give Nova Scotia communities across the province an opportunity to get involved. The members suggested that perhaps one approach might have been to set out regional targets across the province, and I think our approach was to invite communities across the province to get involved, and we think people across the province in different regions, that the experts in renewable energy will have a better judgment about where those projects should be located, when and where they can come on stream. That kind of approach would be better than the government sitting back and identifying where and when different projects would be built. The other question about who sets the feed-in tariff, we thought it would be important to give the job of setting the community feed-in tariff to the Utility and Review Board. They have a great deal of experience in examining the costs of electricity generation projects. They're very familiar with the industry. They're very familiar with a process that sets rates, and we thought it would be better to use their expertise rather than to do it within the department, which is a model that some other governments have used. The member asked about Lower Churchill, and I think it's important to remember that Lower Churchill is a potential project. There's been no decision announced to date that I'm aware of that the government of Newfoundland and Labrador or their corporation Nalcor is proceeding with that project. There has been the discussion in the media of some of the options for how that electricity would get to markets, but there hasn't been a firm project proposal or decision on that. It's an issue that we are watching with great interest. It's a potential source of renewable energy for the province, but I think for the province to have said in this plan that we will be taking so many megawatts from the Lower Churchill, I think the member would have been one of the first to say, well, you know, how could you possibly rely on that? There's no project as yet. There's no certainty as to when it would be delivered. But it is something that we're watching very carefully. The government is in close communications, frequent communications with officials and at the government level, premier to premier, with Newfoundland and Labrador, with New Brunswick, with Prince Edward Island, to talk about ways that we can cooperate in the region around the kind of transmission that would make the delivery of Lower Churchill or wind projects from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia and other parts of Atlantic Canada and potentially to the United States. We're also discussing ways to improve transmission among the maritime provinces, to again improve the ability to share renewable resources between New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Nova Scotia. It's important when you're looking at wind resources to try to balance the system, and the more that you have that you're balancing, the more efficient the system can be. And so we think that that could be an important opportunity for Nova Scotia to work with New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland. So we are looking at all those opportunities. We're looking at the different areas of potential, but at this point they remain potential, as there are not specific projects with specific timelines and financing, et cetera, to make them happen.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so what I've got so far is the Premier went up on the mountain. At this point, I can only assume he just saw the other side, because he didn't come down from the mountain with any tangibles that Nova Scotians can look at. And a lot of money was spent on putting this plan and that PR exercise out there. And I do appreciate, again, a picture we'll do of the beautiful Cabot Trail here and the coastlines of Cape Breton. And we all know about the statistics and information that's there. But what has not been presented is one single solitary number, one action plan by activity, what the incremental cost will be between energy or environment to collaborate on these things, the interaction of that with the major utility for Nova Scotia, which we know is a monopoly through Nova Scotia Power, and thus with their parent group, Emera. And that being all said and done, the government, this is not a plan, I guess. This is a statement. It is not a plan. The Auditor General submitted his business plan, and his business plan talks about their core roles, priorities, objectives, activities they'll do, short-term, long-term, and the costing associated with it. Now that's a plan, which we will discuss separately. This plan isn't a plan because there is not one single solitary number associated with it, any project-directed activity. And by when I say the regions, there's been a challenge, I know, and I'm sure when you've dealt with this and dealing with the feed-in tariffs, of which I've applauded the minister and I think is a great idea, I think should be expanded further. So I think there's some positive things in terms of some objectives that are being set out. But there is no plan to meet those objectives in terms of specifics, because I know one of the challenges with operators from Cape Breton that want to be small scale, that the current utility is saying, well, the cost of that and the rates they would offer, so there wasn't a balance, we're not competitive, and it was prohibitive. So thus the reason for having some regional understanding and the capacity of the current system in the grid. And I commend the government working in a pan-maritime and pan-Atlantic effort with regards to the grid and where we're going to be. I think those are long-term objectives, and I know some good work is happening there. But again, there's even no projection of what would happen. And I do understand from the deputy, if there's a go-ahead today with regards to Lower Churchill, we know the timeline of construction and actually electricity flowing on the grid. So there is no plan. There's a renewable electricity statement that we've received. at great expense. But there isn't one single number that the government can produce and specific project activities in a timeline to 2015 or 2020, when previously working between the province and Canada, there were at least numbers produced to be objectives that could be set forth and initiatives that could be undertaken. So obviously the Premier went up the mountain, saw the other side, had a photo op, came back down, and contributed to being the politician with the largest carbon footprint in the province. And I don't think there was an award in Copenhagen for that. But one of the things that has affected, I guess, on carbon footprints is really the existing capacity then within the electricity market for fossil fuel. And, you know, in Cape Breton, there is the situation of Point Oconee Power Generation Plant with its fluidized bed technology, and subsequently over to Lingan, one of the #1 polluters in the country. And there was a discussion of scrubbers, and that went before the board. Where is the current status, either environment or energy, on putting scrubbers on Lingan, and what is the impact on the targets of putting scrubbers in?
Yeah, Ms. Vanstone?
Yeah, I'm going to refer that question to my colleague Andrew Murphy to talk about scrubbers specifically. But I do want to just respond at a high level to the kind of things that are in the Climate Change Action Plan and the steps to achieve the hard caps and the reductions of 10% below 1990 levels by 2020. Because it is a whole package of activities. Some of it's in regulations, such as the hard caps, which have very specific numbers that need to be achieved out to 2020 in terms of emissions. Some of it is in terms of energy efficiency, which also has programs that are approved to achieve specific targets on the electricity DSM programs. Some of it are demonstration projects like the Fundy tidal demonstration project. There are specific actions about leadership and education, which is also very important in terms of how we're going to transform as a province into in this direction. Specifically about scrubbers, I'll just ask Mr. Murphy to answer that question, please.
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. So there was a suggestion or proposal that scrubbers be put in place at Lingan. That was a number of years ago. The reason for that proposal was to meet emission reduction targets for sulfur dioxide. When that was being considered, the UARB, I believe, suggested that there should be some deeper thought as to whether that was the best approach. And so there was a UARB process that looked into that. What that process considered was not only how do we best meet the sulfur dioxide targets, but also the full suite of environmental targets that the utility face, including things like greenhouse gases, as well as other air pollutants. And at the end of the day, after the analysis was done, while certainly a scrubber would be very effective at removing sulfur, it was determined that there are other methods that would be equally as effective that would cost less and also allow us to advance further on some of our other goals. And that's where you saw the focus evolve to things like demand-side management and energy efficiency and renewable energy and so on, and use those methods to not only reduce sulfur dioxide, but to also reduce all these other pollutants that we're concerned about, and do it in a cost-effective way.
But there was an application before the UARB that everything's been deferred to by this government, because that's the scapegoat aspect of all matters dealing with decision-making. So why did the UARB decline the request from Nova Scotia Power for scrubbers again, just for my benefit?
Sure. So the process essentially looked at what is the best way of not only meeting the sulfur dioxide goal, but also keeping in mind that we have these other targets, such as greenhouse gases, nitrogen dioxide and other pollutants. We need to look at all of those at the same time and not just sulfur alone. And the analysis that was arrived at, and this was all stakeholders that participate in the UARB process, I think, were part of this analysis. It was determined that the best way of meeting the sulfur dioxide cap was to integrate those actions with actions to meet all of the other environmental targets. And that the best way to do that was to do things like energy efficiency and renewable energy, demand side management, and those sorts of activities where you could reduce all pollutants at once, so you're not incurring costs for each pollutant individually.
Thank you. Your time is really elapsed at the moment. Thank you. You'll have another round.
Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn the floor over, I could, to Mr. Epstein for the NDP Caucus.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the two deputy ministers for their presentations. It's good to see two deputies together in allied fields working together and coming to talk with us. We had interesting presentations from them. We also had some interesting questions from my learned colleague from Cape Breton North, although I have to say that the only part of his remarks that I'd be prepared to accept would be the congratulations to the NDP for the 1 year of having formed a government. I found it interesting that there was a suggestion made in his questioning, an assertion really that there were no numbers and no specifics in the renewable electricity plan. And I'd like to turn to that particular point, if I may. I don't know if you have your copy with you, but when I read the plan, I was struck by a number of specifics, and I saw, for example, on page 9 that it was contemplated that there would be amongst the targets for gigawatt hours, Nova Scotia Power and independent power producers would each be responsible for about 300 gigawatt hours, and that's specified fairly exactly. It calls for a minimum of 600 gigawatt hours of new medium to large scale renewable electricity produced in equal parts by NSPI and independent power producers. I also see on page 13 that there will be about 600 to 700 gigawatt hours contemplated to be generated by biomass, and about another 150 gigawatt hours from co-firing in thermal plants. So it seemed to me that this actually did have specific numbers that would get us towards a long way towards at least the initial numbers that are in Mr. Kulikan, your handout this morning. So most of those numbers would add up to about the 1,700 gigawatt hours at the 2011 mark. It's certainly true that there's more to come. But it seemed to me that this plan did have specifics in it. So I guess the first point I want to start with is whether you can help me understand if I'm reading this plan correctly. Are there numbers in there? And have I identified these numbers correctly? Are we on track with some ideas for specifics here?
Mr. Kulikan. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I was trying to get the microphone to draw the member's attention to those very specifics that are in the plan. I'm glad the member has drawn attention to them. He certainly has found the specifics that are there. To reach the target in 2015, there are definite targets for different parts of the industry to meet those targets. We find that 6 of the 7 approved wind projects are proceeding, and we're told that they're on target, so we see progress in that way. But even leading to 2015, we felt it was a better approach for the government to set the broad targets, to assign responsibility for achieving those targets, to indicate where we felt those targets could be met. we have done that. We've done it in a way that engages all parts of the industry, the independent power producers, Nova Scotia Power, communities across the province through the feed-in tariff, and there's also an opportunity for individuals and businesses to get involved. We did not think it would be wise for the government to lay out where each wind farm should be located and who should be constructing which wind farm and what the schedule of that specific wind farm should be. We felt it was better for the electric generation industry and the communities across the province to respond in a way that produces that electricity in a renewable form at the best cost to the ratepayer and with the most involvement possible across the province. So that's the approach that we've taken. The target for 2020 is longer term, and given the uncertainties in this business, and the reference to the Lower Churchill is a good example where we just don't know at this point. Lower Churchill could be possible to help meet those targets. There may or may not be improved transmission by then to allow us to import from renewable energy from other places. We don't know yet the extent of the tidal resource that's there and how economic that it's going to be. So there are a number of those questions that when we look at out beyond 2015, we thought it was appropriate to set a direction and a target of where we're going, but not to be specific at this point, because we certainly expect there will be opportunities at that time that are not known to us now.
Thank you. And as long as we've touched on Nalcor and the Lower Churchill, I wonder if anything is known now about the timetable that Nalcor contemplates in terms of how it might itself approach the possible development of Lower Churchill. Is there even a rough timetable that they seem to be contemplating?
Thank you. I'm not aware of any specific timetable at this point. I've had recent discussions with the Deputy Minister in Newfoundland, who tells me that they are working on developing the project. They're continuing to do that. They continue to show an interest in the project, but they haven't shared any specifics around a timetable at this point. So anything I would provide would be guessing.
That's fine. I hadn't heard any timetable, and I was just wondering if I had missed any information. I opened with the observation that it was a pleasure to see two deputy ministers in an allied field here today, and it certainly is. I'm wondering, though, if either or both of you could help us and the public understand the the differing roles of the two departments, and also what I understand would be the other two main players when it comes to this topic of greenhouse gases, particularly the electricity sector, the other two main players being Efficiency Nova Scotia and the UARB. So unless I've missed any of the players, it seems to me it is the Department of Environment, the Department of Energy, Efficiency Nova Scotia, and the UARB. So could we have some comments to help us understand the main functions of those four entities?
We'll start with Mr. Coolican, shall we?
Yeah,
you might want to share
I'll start.
answer.
I'm relatively new, so if I get anything wrong, Nancy can correct me, which well, I don't have to ask her to correct me, because she does that from time to time.
She's not shy.
I'm actually, I mean, one of the things I've enjoyed. Nancy's cut me off. One of the things I've enjoyed about this position so far is the relationship I've been able to build with a number of deputies, but especially Nancy. And so it was, I'm excited for her, but I was quite disappointed to learn that she's not going to be working with me for much longer. But I have been impressed in my time with the government at the amount of cooperation that there is at the deputy level on departments that are involved in this issue. I'll let Nancy describe more of the role of the Department of the Environment, but I'll just deal a little bit with the Department of Energy and some of the other organizations that are close to us. I think first of all that we look at the GHG caps as pretty serious, and we think we have a role to play in developing energy policy for the province to help to meet those targets. And I think the renewable electricity plan is a good example of that, where we had the GHG targets in our mind. And also the role of EGSPA and other emissions. It's when you start to look out forward, the emissions performance of the province will improve as a result of the renewable electricity plan. So, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, those are related. In terms of the other agencies, other departments and agencies that are involved, I would add that we've been working closely with the Department of Natural Resources, because when you look at the question of biomass, it's important to engage them in terms of the sustainability of the forest resource. And it's not the role of the Department of Energy to determine what the sustainability of the forest is. That's the Department of Natural Resources. So we work closely with them on that. We've also worked closely with the Department of Economic and Rural Development because there's a significant portion of this plan which we believe will add to economic development in the province and jobs. And one example is the investment of DSME in Trenton. And we hope that there will be a role that will be played by the renewable electricity plan in helping or that will lead to the creation of jobs at the Trenton facility. So there, and also the other department that Scott mentions is the Department of Agriculture, because we see longer term a potential for biomass coming from agricultural lands, and also there's the longer-term potential of energy from algae, which is also there, and the federal government is playing a role in research on that at this point, and how the algae will be produced is not yet determined, but there may be roles for other departments in that. So departmental cooperation is quite important. You also mentioned Efficiency Nova Scotia. Efficiency Nova Scotia was established by legislation, and I like to say that it's at arm's length with a dislocated shoulder. So it's an independent arm of government, and its role will be to work on energy efficiency and conservation as Conserve Nova Scotia was doing. And in those areas, it will be the Department of Energy that will be setting targets and objectives for them and providing them with dollars to achieve those objectives. But the Department of Energy will not be overseeing the management of Efficiency Nova Scotia. Our role will be to ensure that the objectives that we wanted to have met are being met. The Efficiency Nova Scotia will also have the responsibility for the demand-side management programs, which have recently been the subject of discussions at the UARB. And as that money comes from ratepayers, Efficiency Nova Scotia will be responsible to the UARB for achieving the plans it lays out in energy efficiency related to the use of electricity. The UARB obviously plays a role in Efficiency Nova Scotia. From our perspective around the renewable electricity plan, we see a couple of roles for the UARB. One is that the UARB will be reviewing any of the projects that Nova Scotia Power comes forward with to help them meet their share of these targets. That the UARB will be reviewing those projects as it does in a normal fashion with Nova Scotia Power to ensure that the expenditures are reasonable and at the lowest at the lowest cost possible. We also have assigned to the UARB the task of developing the community feed-in tariff, which I mentioned earlier, given their expertise in the in establishing rates. They obviously have a much broader role in the electricity system, and I'd probably leave a lot out if I tried to explain all that. So I'll turn it over to Nancy and to describe the role of the Department of the Environment.
Ms. Vanstone.
Great. That's very impressive, Murray. You've been here three or four months, and you obviously have a good, quick grasp of what maybe it took me 33 years to think about what I think about in terms of different department responsibilities. Just picking up on that, and Murray went through most of those elements. In terms specifically of the role of environment, and we have a couple of key roles. One is that environment does have regulatory responsibility in terms of protection of air, water, land quality. So in some areas, we are the regulator in terms of meeting our requirements and getting approvals. So we certainly have a role there in terms of this work. But we also have a very important role in terms of leadership, in terms of promoting the environment and the economy and sustainable prosperity. And that comes partly from our responsibilities in terms of the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, which does link many activities across many departments, many environmental goals, and also economic objectives. Also, our climate change leadership role is very important to us directly in the Department of Environment, and in terms of our relationship with other provinces and territories, their environment departments and their climate change role in the federal government. But we have tried to set our climate change directorate up in a way that ensures that it's working right across government departments, because that climate change file is not at home in any one particular department. The other thing I just wanted to pick up on, and Murray mentioned the importance of working with economic and rural development. We do have an interdepartmental committee of deputies that is co-chaired by environment and the economy. It was working initially with a broad focus on achieving the goals under the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. But really, when we think about so many of these initiatives, rural, renewable energy, the greenhouse gas regulations, they're important for the economy, but they're critically important for us as well they're important on the environment, which is the sort of first place people go often, but very critically important on the economy in terms of positioning Nova Scotia and Nova Scotia businesses so that they are productive, efficient, competitive in the world marketplace, where increasingly markets are looking for what is your carbon content of your product. What are you doing about water conservation? What are you doing about solid waste? So it's a very important element of our economic story as well.
Mr. Epstein.
Thank you. Those are very useful answers. I think my colleague, Mr. Wynot, has some questions now, too. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Wynot.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's as we answer these questions and hear the presentation today, it's and even in the presentation that you, Mr. Coolican, you know, the motivation of why we're going forward with this renewable electricity plan. You know, the 90% electricity comes from fossil fuels at the moment, and the interesting one I want to kind of bring forward here is that in the last 5 years, so that's under previous governments, the rates have climbed by 30%, and Nova Scotians certainly saw that. And I think this is part of the overall plan of this government, is to making life more affordable for the people of the province. So I just want to focus in on, I know you talked a little bit about good jobs and more investment. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and is there some sort of a estimate on how many jobs could be created as a result of this strategy?
Mr. Cooligan. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. I think the plan itself and the numbers that I talked about earlier we're looking at an estimated 5,000 to 7,500 person years of employment inside the province, and it's important.
Oh, sorry. Mr.
Yeah. So it's 5,000 to 7,500 person years of employment inside the province. And it's important to remember that a lot of those opportunities will come in both urban and rural areas. One of the benefits of encouraging people across the province to participate in this policy through the community feed-in tariffs and in other ways, we think will mean that many of the benefits will get spread to rural areas as well as the urban areas of the province. It's also facilitated because of the fact that the wind blows in many different areas of the province and is not solely located in rural or urban areas. Also, because of the use of biomass, we think there will be employment in many of the rural areas of the province that depend on the forest industry to help them out. And then longer term, also the agricultural jobs will come in those areas. We hope that perhaps we can do better. These numbers are based on evidence collected from existing projects, and as I mentioned with the DSME investment in Trenton, we hope that we can add to the benefits that will come from this policy.
That's really good to hear because, you know, again, as a commitment from this government is to create good, well-paying jobs for Nova Scotia families, and obviously that's part of the strategy. So, Madam Chair, I believe my time is up.
Your time has elapsed, yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Wine. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Caldwell, and Mr. Caldwell will have, I'd say, with closing statements, we should say a 9-minute session. 9 minutes for you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you different questions this time a little bit. And the moving efficiency Nova Scotia away from conserve Nova Scotia, there's been a $2 fee put on the power bills. And from the information we have, it looks like that'll generate $42 million a year. Is that correct?
It's not $2, is it? It's 2%. Pardon me? It's not $2, it's 2%. No, I think what he's saying is the average cost of it. Right. I think the amount that was approved by the UARB for the demand side management program was $43 million for this year. I'm not aware of the average impact on the bill of being $2. The member may be correct on that. I think it's important to remember that the approach to demand side management was also the result of a consultation process that was undertaken by Dr. Wheeler. Again, there is a strong belief that across the industry as well as in Nova Scotia, that demand side management is an important part of achieving renewable energy targets and also of creating rate stability, that the least expensive way to produce electricity is to save it, to not use it, both from the point of view of ratepayers as a whole, but also if you're looking at your own electricity bills, as if the price of electricity goes up, but you're using less, your overall bill may go down even though the price of electricity might be going up. So from an individual point of view, as well as a broad ratepayer point of view, the investments in demand side management are extremely important to us achieving these targets. The recommendation made by Dr. Wheeler and that the government adopted was the creation of an independent arm's length Crown Corporation that could manage both the demand side management funds and the funds for energy efficiency in other areas. It's important that the demand side management funds be spent on electricity conservation But we think that the expertise that group will gain and develop as they work on demand-side management on electricity generation will help them on the conservation and efficiency of other forms of energy that may be used in the province, and that there could be efficiencies created by efficiency in the knowledge that they have in working in both areas.
Yes, the issue, and I agree with demand-side management is a good program, but it seems like you're putting increases on the power bills to start with to generate this instead of being a government program that should be funded probably out of the general revenues. And if you take that, if indeed it is $42 million that's generated from this $2 on the bills, you're going to add the harmonizer or GST on that as well, which would be another 15% that the government will get. So it's a significant amount of money, and when you look at that part of it, $2 doesn't seem like anything, but you add again the GST on that. And another question related to that I haven't got a clear answer from, and maybe you can clarify this, is our government come out with the 8% reduction on the heating part of your power bill. Has that been increased to 10% with the increase in the GST?
The last part of your question, I don't know the answer to that. Scott, are you aware of that? Yeah, no, we'll get back to you on.
Yes, if you could provide that to the committee, I'd appreciate it.
With the first part of your with your question, and that's the issue of whether demand-side management should be paid by ratepayers or taxpayers. And I think the position that's been taken by the government, that's a long-standing policy position of the government of Nova Scotia, and that is that the cost of electricity should be borne by the ratepayers, and demand-side management is a cost of the electricity system. The benefits go to all ratepayers, and therefore it's viewed that the cost should be on the ratepayers as well.
Well, before we had the Conserve Nova Scotia, there was all kinds of discussion whether that worked or not, but they did some very positive things, and they did actually affect some of the demand-side management without putting $2 on power bills. And how is Efficiency Nova Scotia going to be any different? And they're going to have money to deal with that Conserve Nova Scotia didn't have. So how is it going to be different? How is it going to work any different than?
It is going to work differently from Conserve, and partly due to the fact that the money is coming from ratepayers. That Efficiency Nova Scotia will be responsible to the UARB for its spending on those programs and achieving the objectives that they set. Demand-side management is not brand new. Nova Scotia Power has been spending funds on ratepayer funds on demand-side management. So while Efficiency Nova Scotia is new, and the size of the funds that are being put forward are new, the demand-side management program itself is not new. Exactly how Efficiency Nova Scotia is going to achieve its targets, I haven't had a chance to review the proposals they've made before the UARB, but I will be doing that. They are assembling a very good team to work on these projects, and I think they're going to be very successful.
When will they be set up? They're supposed to have been set up by April 2010, but that hasn't happened yet. When will that be completed?
I'm not aware of when the transition will take place, but they're certainly from both Conserve and the Department of Energy and Efficiency Nova Scotia will ensure that there is a careful transition. Conserve Nova Scotia has not stopped its work or its programs, and I think the same would apply on the demand-side management side.
Will the monies that were allotted by the government for Conserve Nova Scotia in the budget, where are they going to go?
the money for energy conservation and efficiency will come to the Department of Energy. Those funds have been in the Department of Energy's budget. What the level of funding will be for next year, I can't predict it at this point. The Department of Energy will be then discussing with Efficiency Nova Scotia about the objectives that we want to achieve and the funds that we will be making available to Efficiency Nova Scotia to achieve those objectives. We will be holding Efficiency Nova Scotia accountable to those objectives and for the expenditure of those funds.
And what is the goal of Efficiency Nova Scotia? What's our ultimate goal, beside broad brush answers? What's the ideal situation they should be able to generate in what time frame?
I don't have a specific answer for you as yet. I think it's a good question in terms of what their specific objectives will be. As you mentioned, the general objectives are well known, and that's to keep the energy or the electricity demand flat or declining. We will be setting goals for the funds that the Department of Energy provides to Efficiency Nova Scotia, and but I think it's premature to give you a specific answer on that yet.
Thank you. Mr. Colwell, your time has elapsed now, and we'll turn the floor over to Mr. Clark for the Conservative Caucus.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just to go back, and I know my honourable colleague for Halifax, Shabukto, in referencing back to the renewable electricity statement that was put in place and saying that, yes, there was a plan. And he refers to on page 9 in the sentence, the renewable electricity plan calls for a minimum 600 gigawatt hours of new medium to large scale to be split amongst NSPI and independent. So what he did confirm is there is a reason why he went from elementary to secondary school. But being as learned as the honourable member is with his post-secondary good education, he also knows from statements he's made when he was on the opposition side of the House that this is not a plan, and that he could not, in his complimenting and kudos of welcoming the deputies, where I thought he was going to break into a chorus of solidarity forever, say that there is a plan. However, Madam Chair, what's that? My sympathies then for him. However, Madam Chair, the honourable member knows the difference, and I don't need to say any more on that, but I'll come back to where I left off with regards to scrubbers at Lingan. And one of the things I think we can confirm is that at the time it was deemed to be too expensive. The cost was one of the overarching reasons of not doing the scrubber initiative, even though it would have helped with regards to immediate reductions, especially at that plant. So because the UARB at the time said there was a cost issue and talked about the ratepayers, that was not done. And I'm wondering, because that was not done, what is the analysis that the department has done with regards to, and the reference on the reliance of imported coal, with the fact that there has been the enabling process to allow Donkin Mine to go forward, looking at what the combinations would be and what would be required for Donkin Mine to be used as a domestic supply of coal, and what factors have been considered in utilizing that at Lingan or between Lingan and Point Coney.
Ms. Vanstone.
Thank you very much. In terms of the Donkin Mine and the role of Nova Scotia Environment in that, our role was with respect to looking at that proposal in terms of environmental impact assessment, which we did. So it wasn't with respect to where the coal was going to be used. It was with respect to the operation of that mine. That was done based on the plans they had at that time, and as I'm sure you're aware, they did receive their environmental assessment. The other role of the environment would be then on an industrial approval associated with the actual operation of that mine. The other place where it comes, this comes in is your question about it as a domestic supply. And in that regard, we would be our regulations and our approvals on Nova Scotia Power are on the output in terms of the emissions generated, not on the fuel mix that they decide to use to generate that power. So we focus on what comes out in terms of the outcome that needs to be achieved on that. And there are many things that go into deciding on their fuel mix and the mix of fuels and technology and approach that they use on that.
Thank you. I'm going to introduce these.
Sure, when they get settled there, and we'll just...
Yeah, carry on,
great.
please.
Well, thank you very much. So we have issues with regards to, and I guess, overarching planning and issues that are current day and long term. And one of them would be the life cycle of existing fossil fuel-based power generation in context with a renewable electricity statement that the Premier went up on the mountain to try and get maybe some divine intervention so we could get some numbers added in at some other future point to actually make a plan. And part of it is the lack of linkages between the discussions around where we are with agriculture in terms of switchgrass, in terms of, you know, being able to use for biomass to get away from traditional wood fiber use and the concerns that have been raised in this legislature about that. The fact that we do have, and I know the deputy may say we don't want to look at regions, but he also is aware that there is extensive wind mapping that's done. There are prime areas for development versus other areas. Is there a linkage between what the Annapolis Valley or other farming areas to complement from an economic and a rural economic development basis where that can contribute toward an energy sustainability plan for this province long term, and how it deals with small, independent, the large-scale production that Nova Scotia Power does. Those linkages, the plan has not been there to take the different roles between the departments, to articulate that with a time frame that shows that the government has properly considered all of the linkages necessary. And what I come back to is the ratepayer of Nova Scotia. So we have an issue with regards to one area where it was the rate base. The government has deferred everything to the UARB. We have a plan that we do not know what the cost is going to be to the ratepayers of Nova Scotia. Can anyone tell me if there's been a plan or an assessment done internally that factors in getting to 2020 estimated impact of the renewable standards on the rate base of Nova Scotia?
Mr. Coolican?
Yes, we've done an estimate of the specific plans to 2015, and we're looking at 1% to 2% a year of a rate impact. I would go back to my earlier statements that we hope that Nova Scotians in communities across the province will take this plan and will respond to it in ways that we might not have considered if we were developing the kind of detail that the member suggests of deciding that this farm here is going to be producing this kind of grass and this woodlot over here is going to be producing this much biomass to go to this plant in this specific community or to this wind farm in another place. We think there's tremendous creativity across the province that's been demonstrated to date, and the interest in this plan and the kind of positive comments we've been getting about the plan indicate to us that people across the province are looking at it seriously. They've seen the targets referred to by the other honourable member related to what their opportunities are. They've seen them and they're starting to respond to them, and we're pretty confident that we'll be able to meet the targets that have been set for 2015 in the way we've laid them out, and that we will have a better opportunity meeting those targets in that way rather than deciding which farm is going to grow which kind of grass to put in as biomass. I think when we get beyond 2015, we've set a longer-term goal at this point. As I've said before, I think it would be premature for us to be indicating in the detail we have for the 2015 target exactly where those benefits are going to come from, because as the honourable member knows, there's a lot of change in this industry. There's a lot of work being done that's of a research nature, especially in the Bay of Fundy, and the kinds of opportunities that may come as a result of that. The honourable member also mentioned the Lower Churchill, and there may be some opportunities that come from that will be important to the province. And so for us to get into a detailed plan beyond 2015 would not, in our view, be productive at this time. We will be watching the industry as it develops. We're in close contact with the government of Newfoundland and with Nalcor to understand to get a better sense of their plans when they're willing to share them with us. We're working with the other provinces to look at opportunities to improve transmission across the Atlantic provinces in a way which I think will change the future beyond 2015 in quite a dramatic way.
Are you going to do your introduction or just wait?
If I could interrupt just for a moment, and I'll give you another minute at the end. I wanted to introduce our guests that have joined us in the gallery today, and they are grade 3 students from St. Stephen's School, which is here in Halifax, and we certainly welcome them and their teacher, Nicole Delore, who's with them. And I was asked if I would tell you just briefly what this committee is, and it is the Public Accounts Committee. It has 9 members, 8 plus myself as chair, and we represent all 3 parties that sit in the legislature. And each week we invite witnesses from our government departments to answer questions about the spending and the programs and the planning of government. And we focus primarily on money, which is what public accounts means. We have with us today 2 different departments, the Department of Energy and the Department of Environment, and we have their staff and their deputy minister, and the deputy minister means the top civil servant in that department. So I hope that explains it briefly, and I'm sure the staff can give you more information later. Thank you very much, and welcome to the legislature. And now, if you would like to take another minute, Mr. Clark.
Yes, thank you very much. And to our students, I say welcome, because the topic we're talking about today is about the long-term electricity. When you turn on your lights and your computers, and when there's an opportunity. And what we're discussing today is the fact that these grade 3 students are going to be paying more for electricity as consumers in the province of Nova Scotia. So it's going to be very important to think back to your time here, because public policy will affect you when you start paying the bills your parents are currently paying on your behalf. And you'll be able to say you were part of history, and it may not be so great. So, Madam Chair, what I'll say to our colleagues is that this is a serious matter, one that is affecting future generations of Nova Scotians. And while the government does not want to commit because they want to look at where the levers may come to take credit another day in another area, what we know is, and I'm glad to see the Deputy of Energy had indicated in response to the member for Halifax-Chebucto, that the government would look at Lower Churchill as maybe a way of backfilling provincial commitments that were made on the Mount by the Premier. And looking across the way, maybe he saw PEI, and when he looked across, maybe he would know that they have detailed plans in the province of Prince Edward Island that don't exist here, and that maybe at some day, someplace, and maybe these children will find there will be a plan in the future, and I can assure them there will be a plan, because there will be a new government, because we're one step closer today to the next government to make Nova Scotia life more affordable for Nova Scotians and back to balance. So thank you, Madam Chair.
And with that, your time has elapsed, Mr. Clark. I'll turn the floor over to Mr. McKinnon in the NDP Caucus, please, for your 9 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to have the departments of Energy and Environment before us today, and also great to have those young students here. I think they were very well behaved, and perhaps some members of the House might learn something from them. I would like to begin by talking about the role of natural gas. I have to think about my own area for a while. Looking at Pictou County with natural gas running through the county, but no distribution taking place. And we are told that for $10 million, natural gas could be brought in to one of the top industrial areas of the province, and certainly about the 3rd largest concentration of population as well. So what do you see as the role of natural gas in this province?
Mr. Coolican.
Thank you very much. We see natural gas playing an increasingly important role in the province. It is a cleaner energy. It's not as clean as wind, but it is certainly cleaner than coal. We see that the supply of natural gas across North America seems to be increasing, which as a consumer bodes well for the price. From the point of view of a taxpayer or the government looking for revenue from offshore, or from onshore developments, it's not quite as good news because the royalty revenues are connected to the price. So we think there's a long-term supply of natural gas, and because we are connected to North American markets through the pipeline system, and given the increased exploration and development, particularly of shale gas in the United States, and there's potential for that in New Brunswick as well as in Nova Scotia, we think the supply is there in the long term. We think it does make sense for consumers to switch to natural gas, that there are savings to be incurred. At the same time, I think it's important to remember that it's important that the development of the natural gas system be done on an economic basis. And one of the issues, even in Halifax, is the extent to which the distribution system expands and does so in a responsible way, given the costs that are incurred. And you may have seen references to that through hearings at the UARB recently.
Nova Scotia Power spent about $45 million in the last year, in about $30 million for a bag house in Trenton, and about $15 million in upgrades. And it's interesting that natural gas could in fact be brought into the county for $10 million. Looking at the caps on greenhouse gas, will those caps have an impact on possible shutdown or closure at Trenton's NSP?
Certainly, the caps that Nova Scotia has set for greenhouse gas emissions will lead to a lower use of coal, and our renewable electricity plan will result in a lower use of coal. Nova Scotia Power will be also increasing the percentage of natural gas that it burns, and so there will be an impact. I've not heard Nova Scotia Power talk about closing any specific coal plants. I think also, in terms of your comment earlier, it's important to consider not just the cost of the bag houses, but it's important to consider the cost of changing Trenton, if that were the case, from a coal burning facility to a natural gas burning facility. So when you do the math, you've got to look at that as well. I don't have the exact math in my head, but that's an important consideration.
The Minister of Environment and the 3 MLAs from Pictou County met with a group very concerned about not just the fly ash coming out of Trenton, but also the sulfur and other nitrous gases and so on. And that was last Friday. And there is a development taking place in relationship to a health study. Could we get some information on that?
Ms. Vanstone?
Yes, thank you. I understand from that meeting that they were discussing some long-standing concerns that people have in that area, and the two items that came out of that meeting. One is certainly a commitment to continue to exercise our current approval processes, which we have been doing in terms of making sure that we have requirements in the approvals in that area, so that we are making sure that they are performing to standard, that we are inspecting, that we're following up, and that we're continuing to work on the emissions associated with that. The other item that I think the honourable member was referring to is that there were discussions with Nova Scotia Environment, Health Promotion and Protection, and also with the Pictou Local Health Authority on looking at the situation in terms of reviewing information on health events, particularly cancer rates in that area, and looking as well at conditions around the local area and seeing if there was, from that information, what kind of connections there were. So from environment's perspective, we're certainly participating in that review. We'll be providing them with the information we have around air quality results and emissions to contribute to that review.
With nearly 90% of our electricity coming from fossil fuels, I'm wondering about, we have some coal being produced locally through strip mining, and a lot of it is imported coal, and we've always been concerned about that imported coal. We're concerned about all of the effects of fossil fuel. However, do we know what percentage? People used to talk about Colombian coal as blood coal and so on. What is the percentage, perhaps, of do we have any idea of that?
Mr. Cooligan.
I don't have a specific number on the percentage. I think the great majority of the coal is imported, and I can get back to you with a number on that. I think the considerations that Nova Scotia Power would look at would be questions of cost, questions of the quality of the coal, which has an impact both on the emissions, but also has an impact on the output of the generating station as well.
Thank you. What is the history of NSP emissions, perhaps over the past 5 years in relationship to? Do we have any information on the tons of emissions from NSP in the province throughout recent years? Better, worse?
Ms. Vanstone.
Yes, we do have some information on that. Andrew, did you want to just provide that?
Sure. Yeah. Mr. Murphy.
So I'll speak to a couple of different emissions. So we'll start with sulfur dioxide. We put up in place a cap in 2005 that reduced that cap by 25% from what it was previously. And then starting this year, in 2010, that cap was reduced a further 25%, so a total reduction of 50% in that cap. In the recently announced Climate Change Action Plan, further reductions were put in place for 2015 and 2020 that will ultimately bring that number down to by 75%. In terms of nitrogen dioxide, it's another pollutant that we're concerned about. There was a new cap put in place in 2009 that caused a reduction of around 20% in that pollutant. And then I'll also talk about greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases in 2004 were around 10.5 megatons. In 2008, around 9.78, so they were down slightly. So I'll give you a sense of where emissions are going in the last 5 years or so.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I'm going to interrupt now. The time for questioning has elapsed.
Thank you.
And as is our custom, we give a short amount of time for a closing remark if you wanted to say anything after our questioning. So perhaps I'll begin with Mr. Cooligan and then go to Ms. Vanstone.
Thank you very much. I appreciated the opportunity. I think if the school children were still here, I would add to the honourable member's reference the notion that we believe that over the long term, the price of electricity will be more stable in Nova Scotia as we move towards more renewable energy, and also that the kids would be interested in the level of emissions that we see will be reduced through this plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Vanstone.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's been a privilege to be able to be here on one of my last days as a public servant, so I appreciate that very much. And I guess I would just like to add that I think we've made great progress on our environmental goals. I think we are really approaching them in a different way that really talks about their intricate relationship with our economy as well as our environment, and I look forward to hearing how that continues over future years. And I'd just like to say what a privilege it's been for me in the last couple of years to work with the Department of Environment and with the other departments of government on trying to move forward on changing our economy and our approach and many of our behaviors so that we really are moving forward on sustainable development to achieve both prosperity and a clean and healthy environment. We have a great story in what we did on solid waste, and I'm confident that we're going to do the same kind of transformation when it comes to renewable energy and many other areas that we need to achieve in terms of meeting the goals of that legislation. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vanstone. And we have 3 items that were promised for further information. I can share that with you later. The third one just added was the one on Colombian coal. So we will ask that you send that information to the committee. I would like to thank you as well and wish you well, Ms. Vanstone, in the future. And I believe Mr. Pereira would like to say a quick comment, please. We do have committee business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Government Caucus and other members of this committee, I really do want to thank you for your great service. You've served a number of governments in your term here, and you've served them all with distinction. And I know that over the last several years, you've led a really ambitious strategy on climate change and energy conservation. And we thank you for your service to the people of Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Pereira. Thank you very much. And we do have some committee business, but if our witnesses would like to leave, you're welcome to gather up and go out. On the issue of committee business today, we have before us, first of all, the report or the strategic plan from the Auditor General, which you all have. And I have a motion or a couple of motions from Mr. Caldwell. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Caldwell for some discussion on that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. These motions are brought forward as a result of the Auditor General not being able to get the information he required to do audits. And I'll read the first one into the record, and I'll have those this one circulated for everybody. Whereas during the course of the attempt to conduct full performance audit of Nova Scotia Business Inc. Incorporated, Department of Economic and Rural Development Industrial Expansion Fund, and Department of Health Mental Health Services, the senior management of the above Crown corporations and departments refused to provide information required by the Auditor General. And whereas the mandate of the Public Accounts Committee includes a review of the report of the Auditor General, which requires full transparency and accountability without exception. Whereas it's clear that the current Executive Council gave direction to senior management to withhold from the Office of the Auditor General documents that were required for the completion of the above-mentioned performance audits. And whereas the Auditor General has pointed out that this practice constitutes an unwarranted interference with the audit process and that it represents poor accountability to the House of Assembly. And whereas this resulted in an incomplete audit in one instance and compelled the Auditor General to issue a denial of an opinion of his audit on the operation of Nova Scotia Business Inc. and the Industrial Expansion Fund, and pointed out that denial of an audit opinion is the most severe audit sanction available to him. Therefore, be it resolved that the committee direct the clerk to arrange for the transfer of the complete files as requested previously by the Auditor General for the purpose of a performance audit to have been published on June 2010 report of the Auditor General to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly for the Nova Scotia Business Incorporated to the Officer of the Auditor General no later than noon, June 15th, 2010. 2, the committee direct the clerk to arrange for the transfer of complete files as requested previously to the Auditor General for the purpose of a performance audit to have been published by June 2010, report of the Auditor General to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly for the Department of Economic and Rural Development to the Auditor General, no later than noon, June 15th, 2010. 3, that the committee direct the clerk to arrange the transfer of complete files as requested previously by the Auditor General for the purpose of performance audit to have been published in June 2010, report of the Auditor General to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly for the Department of Health to the Office of the Auditor General no later than June 15, 2010. And 4th, if the Department of Economic and Rural Development, Nova Scotia Business Inc., and the Department of Health fail to comply with the committee's wishes, as expressed in paragraph 1, 2, and 3, the Public Accounts Committee authorize the chair to issue a subpoena to compel the production of the files, and I so move.
Well, thank you very much. And is there a seconder for that motion? I second that. Mr. Clark has seconded that. And discussion on the motion. Mr. Pereira.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as the member from Preston knows, the government really does want to work with the Auditor General and to give the Auditor General all of the files he needs to complete his audit, not just of these particular files, but all the files in the future. As you know, Madam Chair, on this committee and elsewhere, we've had endless, really mindless discussions about who should get access and under what conditions, and the member from Preston has been a party to those discussions over the years. And what we really would like is what the Auditor General would like is to get access to documents, particularly documents relating to the Cabinet and relating to his audit, and documents relating to solicitor-client privilege, but in a way that protects the confidentiality of that information and protects the Office of the Auditor General itself against third-party claims. And so there's really no debate here between us, no difference of opinion between us as to whether or not these documents should be made available. It really is a great opportunity for us at this time to put something in place that would ensure the capacity of the Public Accounts Committee and of the Auditor General to get documents that are needed for both of us, to perform our duties. And, so I think it's an important time for us to act. It's an important time for the government to act, and I think the government is in discussions with the Auditor General at the moment as to how exactly that transfer of documents should happen, and what kind of legislation needs to be in place. So we wouldn't, we agree in principle with this motion, that documents should be made available, but we believe that those documents should be available when that legislation and when those safeguards are in place.
Thank you very much. Mr. Caldwell, did you want to add to that comment?
I think it's appropriate at the present time. I'm not convinced that the government is as committed to providing the information that the honourable member indicated. Because if there was no issue with anything that the Auditor General may find, I would think that probably they should provide this information as we've requested to the Auditor General immediately, provide that. And there's been some discussion in the past about a court case that said this information may not be secure in the Auditor General's hands. And the Auditor General made it very clear that all the information he provided will be held in confidence, and it is going to the Auditor General, not to the public or not in the public forum here in the committee. And there's been rulings, court rulings that indicate that, or lack of court rulings, that Cabinet privilege and the Auditor General, and I can quote or bring the committee's attention to the Cabinet privilege and Justice Wright cited at Carvey versus Ontario in order to weigh the compelling interest of secrecy required decision-making at the highest level. And it goes on to say, basically, that there is no ruling in that particular case.
Thank you.
And then we could go on further, solicitor-client privilege. Again, there was no waiver of privilege when it's given to the Auditor General. And these are justices that have said this. Although the government's finance minister indicated that indeed that may be the case. So there's a difference of opinion here. I think the gist of the whole process here is the Auditor General has a right to get these documents. He should get these documents immediately so he can properly do an audit. And if the government's not willing to do that immediately and putting up a bill that they will bring in the future, I think they're just trying to hide behind that and not provide the information that the public really deserves to get.
Thank you. Mr. Clark.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And to my honourable colleagues that have spoken to this matter, I do know, and to the member for Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island, there has been precedent in the past where access to documents have been able to be facilitated. They've been done in-house and on the very caveats of the principles of confidentiality being maintained, whereby access is granted for people to review documents. They don't get to take those documents, but they definitely can review the documents in accordance to the audit process they want to undertake. That any opinion with regards to any differences between the auditor and or department or the ministry, that those matters, the Attorney General, in terms of what are commercially sensitive or proprietary and subject to confidentiality, are worked out. And so if it is the intent of the government to be sincere in meeting what they've publicly said, the motion that is offered and or any of the mechanisms that can be associated with it, that there is a precedent in place that could facilitate the Office of the Auditor General undertaking its work to maintain the confidentiality and the proprietary matters at hand, and quite frankly would also show the goodwill and the basis of coming here in the fall session of the legislature to enact enabling legislation to support it. And so for the government to say it can't be done, it's about the will of the government to want to lead and to show Nova Scotians whose trust has been shaken in the very institution of government, both the legislature and that of the cabinet, to show goodwill and to show that we're moving forward steadfast in our resolve for transparency.